Your Zionist history, culture, Jewish identity is all contrived. It's synthetic. It's artificial. If people sat down, and they still do today, there are think tanks, JPPI and various others like that, and they think, how could we further advance Zionism? How could we change the story? How could we better the story? How could we progress? How could we get more followers? And one of the things they did was they wanted to make Jews appear as if they are organically connected to the Holy Land, but not from a religious perspective, not from a spiritual perspective, not from a God-centric perspective, rather from a national perspective.
What's up, family? This is your man, not your boy, bringing you another gold nugget that you can either pick up or you can just kick it aside. Yeah, I'm here in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, but I want to bring you all this video because here it is as a rabbi, Jewish rabbi, who is exposing the whole intentions of the Zionists, you know, Netanyahu, who they have stolen the identity of what a Jew is. That they have also created this state of Israel by taking people's land, as well as stealing identities from those who are Jews, and yet we see the lie that has been presented to the world by the Zionists. Enjoy the video and add this to your library.
Today's guest is Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, an international speaker, author, and rabbi for over 30 years. He's a well-known critic of Zionism, and his most recent work, The Empty Wagon, Zionism's Journey from Identity Crisis to Identity Theft, is a 1,381-page treatise on the differences between Judaism and Zionism.
Zionism itself was created as a substitute for Judaism, a replacement for Judaism, and a way to negate Judaism.
Yeah, so that takes us to our first question. What is a Jew?
Zionists are unable to answer because they negated the real definition. When I say the real definition, I mean the only intellectually consistent one. Being a Jew, in the most accurate way to describe it, is a job description given by God. God said, you are deputized into this religion. You are obligated to fulfill these commandments, whether you do them or not. The obligation, the job description, defines you as a Jew. Now, the Zionists didn't want this definition of Jew. The Zionist plan was to change, to end anti-Semitism by changing Semitism as far as Jews are concerned, by eliminating that. The problem with the original plan, assimilation, is that it didn't work. In the late 1800s, there were pogroms, primarily in Russia, which showed the Zionists, or the assimilated Jews actually, that assimilated Jews are still Jews and they're still hated. But now that's where the identity crisis comes in. The subtitle of my book is Zionism's Journey from Identity Crisis to Identity Theft. The Zionists didn't understand this. They were thinking, why do people hate us if we're just like the Gentiles? We're just regular Russians. Why do they look at us as Jews? That's a very good question. I once asked an anti-Semite, a real famous, I don't want to say his name, real famous anti-Semite, how do you decide who's a Jew? He says, well, whoever identifies as a Jew is Jewish. The Zionists had said to themselves, hey, we don't want to be Jews, but the Gentiles won't let us be Gentiles. So what are we? That was the identity crisis. And many scholars have used that phrase in various contexts. It was an identity crisis. So they came up with what I call identity theft. We're going to change the definition of Jew. Nationalism was just starting in those days. This was the 1800s. It was the Balkan people and others. Nation states started being formed in those days. And they said, hey, nationalism worked for so many people, let it work for the Jews as well. So we're going to change the definition of Jew to a nationality. Until the Zionists, nobody looked at the Jews as a nationality. The plan was to change the definition of a Jew to a nationality. And the idea was that once the Jews change their definition, the way they look at themselves, the world will change the way they look at the Jews as well. The Jews will also, by changing the way they look at themselves, change their personalities, change their ideology, change the way they act, the way they behave, and change their aspirations and their values. Whereas previously, Jews were, as the Bible describes it, Mamleches Kaihanim V'Goy Kadosh, which means a people who are enjoined by God to fulfill this religion. And the Jews themselves, about 1,000 years ago, were the ones that suggested they live in ghettos. They wanted to be separate, socially and culturally separate from the rest of society, loyal to the countries that they live, absolutely, but culturally and socially separate, because we have our own laws, we have our own lifestyle, and they were. There were assimilated Jews that didn't like that, and when they had a chance to break out of the ghetto, they did, thinking, as I mentioned, that assimilation is going to end anti-Semitism and they're going to be like everybody else. When they saw that didn't work, then they tried nationalism. Nationalism is another name for Zionism, Jewish nationalism. That's all Zionism is. But the thing to know about Zionism is that whereas the Kurds, for example, look at themselves as a nationality and they're trying to find a state, right? The Jews never did. The Zionists had to convince the Jews that you are not what you think you are. You are not the Mamleches Kaihanim V'Goy Kadosh. You are not a people who are enjoined by God to fulfill this religion, these religious laws. You are a nation. You need a language. You need a flag. You need a country. Because Jews didn't share a language for 2,000 years. More than for thousands of years, we hadn't spoken Hebrew. In biblical times they did, but that wasn't the national language of the Jewish people, meaning that's not what united us into being a people. The only thing that united us into being a people is our Torah, our faith. It was so well known that this quote that we are only a people because of our faith, it's over 1,000 years old, and it was like the meme of Jewish identity. Even Theodor Herzl mentions it in his diary. Everybody knew that. The Zionists had to change that. And because Jews had no flag, they had no common language, culture, or land, the Zionists had to provide them with it. The Zionists set out to synthesize a new nationality. But instead of creating a new nationality out of nothing, we'll stand and we'll call
like
ourselves
the Canism that you refer to.
The Canaanim, yes.
Yeah.
So, yes, very good. There was this small group of kind of like Zionists called the Canaanim that decided to create a new nation. The Canaan is named after the people who were occupying, who were living in the Holy Land before Joshua came in there and conquered it. And they decided, okay, we're gonna make a new nationality. We're the Canaanim. It didn't never hit it off, because why would anybody identify with that? So the Zionists, Theodor Herzl mostly had this brilliant idea. You know, if you want to if you want to change your identity, a witness protection program or something, you can get the government to give you a whole new identity, and that'll work. But there's a lot of resources and time and effort spent to create such. There's another way to do it that's easier. Kill somebody that's around your age, steal his papers, steal his birth certificate, steal his license, steal his identity, and you're him. That's what the Zionists did to the Jews collectively. We're going to erase Jewish identity. We're going to take their history, change it a bit. We're going to take their identity. We're going to take their self-image. We're going to take Jewishness, and we're going to make it into Zionism. We're going to get the Jews a flag. There was a Zionist flag before there was a state of Israel. We're going to get the Jews a language. There was a Zionist language. Modern Hebrew was created by the Zionists before there was a state of Israel, because they wanted to supply the Jews with national characteristics, national symptoms, national equipment. They redid history, redid ideology, and just started creating cultural centers and schools and an entirely new, it was a social engineering project. But one thing they were unable to steal, and that's the definition of a Jew. Considering what the definition of a Jew is It depends on Torah law. Whoever the Torah says is obligated in the commandments is a Jew. So now, how are the Zionists going to define a Jew? Judaism, what value is the Holy Land? The Holy Land is the Holy Land. That's what it is to us, a holy land. It's not a national homeland. It's a wonderful place, and the borders of the Holy Land are not exactly the borders of Israel. The southern town Eilat is not part of our Holy Land, and southern Lebanon, somewhere south of Beirut, is the Holy Land. They couldn't even decide whether they wanted the Holy Land or somewhere else. You know, they had the Uganda plan, they had other things. And Theodor Herzl, who was the masterminds behind Zionism, he said, no, listen, guys, we want the Holy Lands because, remember, this is like identity theft. He didn't use these words. I'm paraphrasing, of course. He said, for marketing purposes, we need to get the Jews to identify with our movement. So we're going to use Jewish symbols, phrases that are familiar, concepts that are precious, and we're just going to twist them a bit. The problem is you cannot have a Jewish country, a Jewish state, the way they define a Jewish state, and also be a democracy. And if they want to retain it as a Jewish state, that's the cause of the problem. So the problem is that Israel calls itself the Jewish state. Israel is the only country in the world that claims that it is not the country of its citizens, it's the country of the Jews. This is the point that causes the problem. There is no country in the world that claims that it's the country of people who are not its citizens, never were its citizens, don't claim to be its citizens, don't plan on being its citizens. That means two things. Thing number one, if you live in Israel and you're not Jewish, although you may have civil rights to vote and things like that, Israel is not your country, meaning you do not have national self-determination rights in Israel. However, if you're somebody like me, who lives outside of Israel, is not Israeli, I don't have a right to vote. I have no civil rights in Israel. Israel is my country. Netanyahu claims he's my prime minister. Israel claims to be my state. Israel is the only country like this. Nowhere else. Jews should identify as Israelis, but Israel's the only such country, and that's the cause of the problem. You see? It's all this identity theft. It's a new thing, about 20 years old maybe, identity Zionism. Google it.
I'd like to know what your position is on what the scripture actually says a Jewish person's connection or relationship has to be with that land.
According to Judaism, the land is holy. It was the same Jerusalem and the same Holy Land when the Romans had it, when the Mamluks had it, when the British had it. The only thing that will affect its holiness is the behavior of people in the land. If people behave in a godlike manner, the land itself becomes holier. If people behave against God, then the land itself becomes less holy. It's a spiritually sensitive land. And Jews were there when we had King David, when we had prophets, when we had a much higher level of fulfillment of Judaism than we do today. And then came the idol worshippers, and God said, as it says in the Bible, if you worship idols, God is going to kick you out of the land. And in fact, Jews say that passage 3 times a day in our prayers. And God did that. And we went back once and we got kicked out again. It was because of our sins. Yes, the Romans were the rod of God's wrath at the 2,000 years ago, but this is our belief. My argument isn't with somebody that says, okay, we don't believe that. So, but my answer to him, you don't believe that, then why do you need what is the Holy Land anyway? Then what's a Jew? King David, again, in the Bible, Ruth was a Moabite. She converted. Her descendant is King David. There's no problem with converts. Convert if you want. It's not a race. It's not a ethnicity. It's a relationship with God. It's a being deputized into God's work. That's all being Jewish is. And this is precisely why they insist on drafting all ultra-Orthodox Jews. And now you know why we refuse to go. They will refuse to serve their country. Oh no. The purpose of Israel's army is not merely to be a military. The purpose of Israel's army is to be a melting pot. It's a church of Zionism. You know that they teach about Judaism and Jewish identity in the army? It's ridiculous. The army is their church of Zionism. In the Talmud, there are sections that discuss not technical legal Jewish law, but morals and religion and theology. It's called Agadah. In modern Hebrew, that word means a fairy tale. You see what they did? They did this. They changed the Hebrew accent to make it more Middle Eastern. This is it, you know? Zionism is anti-Semitic. Zionism is anti-Jewish. And the solution, we have to get rid of Zionism.
Think about it. Think about it. Think about it.